Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, I am running kind of late this week, but you forgive me, right? I'm pretty walloped by my day job, and my dad is having yet more health problems that require more wheelman duties from me. Plus, my last few days included a memorial service on Saturday for Barry Malzberg, a podcast trip out to Bronxville on Sunday with Cecile Wajsbrot, and then a podcast session on Monday where traffic in New York was just god-awful. So it's been a little tiring. And I would say at least next week I get to relax by taking a red-eye to Amsterdam and spending a couple of days at a pharma conference in Rotterdam where I'll be speaking and paneling about my pharma stuff. I did give myself a couple of days after the conference to do something. I don't know what. I haven't made any plans yet. Haven't booked a hotel. Don't know if I'll be in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Brussels. I'm flying out of Amsterdam on Mother's Day morning. That's the only thing that's locked in. So if you've got anybody I should record with or art I should go see in any of those cities or elsewhere, yeah, let me know. I did pitch Benjamin Moser over in Utrecht, but haven't heard back yet. So maybe I'll be hauling my pod gear with me on this trip. But yeah, it can all get a bit much. On the business side, for my whole pharmaceutical industry advocacy / lobbying thing, people think I have some great insight into the administration and its policies and how they affect my weird little sector. And maybe I do in comparison to other people. So I keep getting calls to speak, even though I warn everybody at the beginning of every presentation, nobody knows anything. But very recently, a trade show in Brazil called to say they want me to speak. Unfortunately, it overlaps with a trade show I'm already committed to speak at in Philadelphia. But that's okay. They said you can speak remotely on day 3 of the Philadelphia conference, which is day 2 of our conference, if you just drive home from Philadelphia in the morning and get to your desktop, etc. Which does not beat yesterday when I got a pitch to record with someone, to give a presentation, explained I had a can't miss medical appointment at 10 a.m. that day in early June, to which they said, well, perhaps you could speak virtually from 9:15 to 9:45, to which I just let them say, all right, I let them know, if you're okay with my giving a presentation from my phone while I'm parked outside my oncology appointment, cool. They are. They wrote back saying they would still be honored to have me speak, especially in that context. So I've got that coming in about a month. I mean, it's nice to be in demand and all, but I could use some downtime. Anyway, sorry to do all the griping, but it's not like there's anyone else I can talk to about this, you know? Still, let's get to this week's show. My guest is that podcast session from Monday that I just alluded to with the terrible traffic, and that guest is the cartoonist Craig Thompson. Craig has a phenomenal new graphic novel out yesterday, which is Tuesday, April 29th, 2025 for you time travelers. It's out from Pantheon called Ginseng Roots, a memoir. Now, Craig spent about 10 summers of his childhood working on ginseng farms in his little Wisconsin town. And that experience provides a launch pad for this book, where he gets into the history of ginseng cultivation in Asia and America, the economic and the cultural drivers of the market, and how they've changed since his childhood. And And in the process, he gets into geopolitics, the mythology of Chinese herbs, the present-day farmers and immigration in the U.S., and as the subtitle indicates, I mentioned earlier, memoir. And Craig does this unbelievable job of weaving these strands together, where he creates this compelling story of the rise and fall of his the town he grew up in, the ginseng farmers, and his own relationship to the land and to his family. And as we'll talk about a little, it's sort of a midlife revision of Craig's big breakthrough memoir from 2003, Blankets. But he also gets into the lives of those immigrants who became ginseng farmers when the local labor force dried up, and how they got here and what their stories were. And it's such a complex book, bringing the micro and the macro together with these resonances that go back thousands of years. And I flat out marveled at how Craig managed to pull it off so well. Now, Ginseng Roots initially came out as 12 issues as a comic book format, a 6x9 comic. But for the collected edition, there's almost, I think, about 70 to 80, maybe 100 new pages. And the art is amazing. It really integrates Craig's brushwork with graphic elements and design that make every page a joy just to look at, much less carrying you along through the stories that he's telling. It's in a 2-color format, but as he'll tell us, he managed to get kind of obsessive about what he could get out of the second color, and, well, it leads to a really sophisticated palette of tones throughout the book. Again, it makes an absolute joy just to look at, much less read and take in. I was floored by how good this book is, and how well the personal aspects of Craig's story mesh into the bigger picture. There's never a sense of, I'm going to shoehorn myself into the story now. I mean, there are episodes and adventures that he and his brother go on in this book that could fit into like the great autobio comics of the 90s. And it's right beside comics journalism in the spirit of the great Joe Sacco. And that's, followed by these incredibly ornate and graphic dives into mythology and ancient history. And it's all knotted up in the notion of narrative medicine and the ongoing deterioration of Craig's hands, which thankfully did not impact how beautiful this book looks. As you can tell, I can go on and on about Ginseng Roots. It is a major achievement. It is a joy also to finally sit down with Craig after years of just like passing acquaintances at festivals and cons and not seeing him in the last couple of years of cons post-COVID. I'm really happy we got to sit down and have this conversation. So go get Ginseng Roots, a memoir, out now from Pantheon. Now, as caveats go, we recorded at a friend's apartment in New York City, so there were some sirens, police, and such. And there's this weird little electro fluttering on my channel, which I tried to sample out, but failed. I'll give you your money back if you're not satisfied. Anyway, here's Craig's bio from the book. Craig Thompson is a cartoonist and the author of the award-winning books Blankets, Carnet de Voyage, Goodbye Chunky Rice, and Habibi. He was born in Michigan in 1975 and grew up in a rural farming community in central Wisconsin. His graphic novel Blankets has won numerous awards, including the Eisner, Harvey, and Ignatz Awards, and has been published in nearly 20 languages. He lives in Portland, Oregon. Well, actually, he doesn't, and you'll learn that from our conversation. If you have an idea for where he should live, he is taking suggestions. His new book is Ginseng Roots, a memoir. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Craig Thompson. So I guess to start off, how's your hand?
Oh, thanks for asking.
Because you don't exactly resolve how the hand is, although the comic is evidence of
yeah, I mean, it's not doing great. It's degenerative, so it's in a worse place now than when I started the book. Since the book, I had surgery on my left hand. So I have the condition, as I also document in Ginseng Roots. And before I'm getting too far ahead of myself.
Just jump all over the place, please. You've listened to the show.
Ginseng Roots does follow the deterioration of my drawing hand, which is really a genetic condition, but it was triggered by a trauma I had at the very beginning of my ginseng research on a trip to China. Maybe we'll get into that or not. But yeah, so over the course, it's taken me 8 years more to make this book, and my hands just kept getting worse and worse, both of them. I talked with a musician friend, Joe Hagee, who's a great Portland musician, and he has the same condition, also in both hands. And he managed to get surgery in his non-dominant hand first, almost for free, when he was traveling in the Czech Republic. And then it went well enough that a year later he got it in his dominant hand in Berlin. Both of them are almost free, and both of them went really smoothly. So I thought, like, okay, maybe I'm ready to risk this.
Oh, I thought you were ready to risk a European book tour so that you can get better medicine,
I've been having those conversations, finding surgeons in Europe, because the American healthcare system is destroying me. But I sacrificed my non-dominant left hand first. And that was about a year ago. So I got surgery, July of last year. And I'm not super stoked on the results. And along with that, in the book, I talk about getting radiation treatments. I did 7 radiation treatments on both hands. And
no superpowers, though.
No, the opposite. The doctors told me, 60% of people that get this treatment have improvements. 15% it doesn't do anything stable. And then 15% it worsens, whether it's related or not. And I was in that 15% category. So whatever the radiation did, it just seemed to, accelerate the degeneration I was experiencing.
How did it impact the art? Because the art here, you're making leaps from past work. From my way of looking at it, it's you're going, way, way beyond what I'm used to from your art. So
it's definitely more dense and detailed.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a result of the serialization. But otherwise, I don't think the art is affected by the hand condition. I work slower, but that could be age. That could be my mental health, But I don't work at the sort of frenzied pace I did in my youth,
It was a story.
Who does?
Yeah, I forget which guest I was talking about this with recently. It was you're near my age. I had the stretch late high school, college into grad school where Klaus, Bag, the Hernandez brothers, everybody, every month or two, it was a comic, and it was just, it was amazing. And now it's those men all aged into their 40s, into their 50s, and you slow down and you have to pick and choose, and it's not as easy to spend 18 hours over a table, drawing and drawing and drawing.
Yeah. But I feel like I learned those lessons pretty early on, though, because, my first book, Goodbye Chunky Rice, I did while working. I've told this story before, but
I haven't heard it, so go on.
As a graphic designer at Dark Horse. That was my last real day job.
Yeah.
And that was in the 90s. But I would be working on computer all day and, on a mouse and trackpad. And then all night, every weekend, drawing my comics. So just no breaks. And I destroyed. That was a lesser condition, though. I just got tendinitis, which is super common for cartoonists.
Sure.
But it threatened my drawing career, even back then, when I was 20.
Your entire life is a struggle against your own art.
It is, but I quit Dark Horse, and I also quit drawing for at least a month or two, and just rested for the first time in my life, to get my drawing hand back, and then I had a
600 pages. Yeah.
Well, I was working on Chunky, which is 120, but I had a 6-month nest egg. I had a very modest lifestyle. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I can make it 6 months to try to get a career as an illustrator. Otherwise, I got to get a real job again. And then luckily at the end of that 6 months is when I get the Nickelodeon gig that saved a lot of cartoonists, in the 90s.
But tell me about doing the book serially. You mentioned that it was done first as a comic or in pamphlet form. The decision to do it that way and how that differed from your past work.
A lot of things. One, I wanted something out sooner because I am slow, or at least when you're doing a book that's almost 600 pages or 500 pages, it takes you forever. And I didn't want to be work in isolation for that long. That was a big component. I'd sort of just gotten bored with the graphic novel format. Just because, when Blankets came out 20 years ago, it was a novel kind of object.
Yeah.
And now it's just like that's the whole market, and there's hundreds of new graphic novels every month. How do you keep up with this? How do you dip in and sample? I think for me, even as a reader, it took some of the fun out of comics. I miss the days when you go into a comic shop with $20 and walk out with 6 books.
You knew what was there.
You're learning about different artists. And now that would maybe get you, and it wouldn't even get you one book, but maybe it could.
I sort of had to rebuy your blankets, and that was double $20. But, I'm not going to ask for the money back. No, I'm just kidding. It's all worth it. But it was just going into a comic store meant something. And the Wednesdays, that was always the thing. You knew things were coming out. You knew, even if it was the indie alt guys, you had an idea of, what was coming and when. Yeah,
and that was it too, is I never got to partake of that indie serialized comics scene, because I kind of came at the tail end of that.
Right.
When the indie comic was phasing out and people were waiting for something new, and then the graphic novels came. So, for me, the most, if not childhood, when I was getting comics from the spinner rack with my ginseng earnings, the other time was like in my early 20s when I was going to the indie comic shop, and buying 8-Ball and Love and Rockets and all the classics, Yummy Fur, Silly Daddy,
I haven't heard that in a long time. Joe Chiappetta stuff. Wow, that's a flashback.
Yeah, probably the biggest influences on me of that era were Silly Daddy, Joe Chiappetta, Dylan Horrocks' Pickle, serialized. Yes. And for some reason, the serialized version of Pickle is even cooler than the...
It is, yeah. I started with issue 3. I remember seeing it, because you're like me, I bought it in Atomic Books in Baltimore, and remember exactly the moment where I picked up that issue of Pickle, and that ended up taking me to New Zealand a decade later. I met Dylan at a Small Press Expo in 98, and he said, if you're ever in Auckland, let me know. And 5 years later, I thought, I'd like to get away to New Zealand. Let me see if I can crash at his place the first day.
I remember this interview.
Yeah, did a tour for a couple of weeks after. But
it's a great one.
That's the farthest a comic has ever taken me. You, on the other hand, China and Korea for this book. So
Well, Dylan Horrocks seems underrated these days, in my opinion.
I think it's just the lack of regular output. If there were things coming out, people would be holding him in that esteem that. We should, I think, because I think he's one of the greats, and I think Hicksville is all that. Do you have the mini that came with
yes.
Oh gosh, I forget.
The Last Fox story.
Yeah,
it's the best piece of comics ever made.
God, yeah. I love geeking out like this. That's great.
But there's so many. And Jay Stevens was a big influence of mine in that era. But all the standards too, like I was saying. But indie comics were so exciting in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. It's when I did we're just going to do a greatest hits conversation here, but when I recorded with Porcelino and he talked about what it was like when he sent out a mini, and like 6 months later, you get a postcard from like Chester Brown or somebody. He said that it meant a lot more than all the likes and clicks nowadays, even though, it's such delayed gratification. It took months and months and you had no idea this was coming, but, we had a very different sense of what it meant to make comics and to have an audience back then. Yeah,
and I owe a lot to John Porcelino too, because I was doing mini comics in the 90s, and he was he's still running Spit and a Half distribution.
Which is always supposed to be phasing out. He's been saying for a few years, but
But that was like what connected everybody. Yeah. So I was able to get everybody's, Tom Hart, Jennifer Daydreamer, everybody's comics, and write them letters, send my own books, so that's really was the community then.
Yeah.
It was all revolving around John and Spit and a Half. And maybe that was part of doing serialization with Ginseng Roots too. Is like I'm missing mini comics too.
Yeah.
Because the format I worked in was 6x9, so it's a little closer to the mini comic format than a traditional superhero, comic book format.
Yeah. Tell me what you learned from working in that mode in the schedule, the frequency, the page, everything.
Well,
what was it like making comics?
It took way longer. It probably slowed me down by a couple of years. Mm-hmm. Because it's just different. Like there's a different kind of flow. Usually I like pencil or I thumbnail the whole book and really figure it out before I start drawing the final art. And then book design happens at the end of everything. And this time I was like stopping all the time to work on book design.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. How much of the mode you had to figure out in advance? And
no, I mean, I had an outline for the book, and then I would just work on one chapter or one issue at a time. Mm-hmm. So I kind of vaguely knew what the next issue would be, but I was only, as far as writing, drawing, penciling, inking, it was just one chapter at a time. And the first year, I think we had 4 issues out, which was the plan, a quarterly comic book, one every 3 months. And then like every 90s indie comic, it, disintegrated into as few as one a year, but there's also a pandemic going on and I was moving around a lot. And so there was just, and then there'd be these moments in the flow of the book where I'm like, I actually don't know what the next issue is right now. So I would take longer to figure that out.
Really? That's what I was wondering. How much of it was planned versus I think this is what issue 7 is going to be, but...
Yeah, mostly followed the outline I concocted at the beginning of the project, but still it was, there was all kinds of things I couldn't predict. And as with all my books, I never know the endings. Yeah. This one was a little different because the 12th issue was really difficult. I took a long time on that. It's a double-sized issue too, but that's when I really disrupted my life because I was reaching the end of the book, and because it's based on real life, and a lot of it is real-time experiences. I can't make stuff up. Although I did have people that suggested that. They're like, it's your book. You can turn it into autofiction at this point if it means wrapping up the narrative.
Dramatic construction.
But I was trying to avoid that. I'm like, but I like with Blankets, I still hadn't lived the final chapter of the book. Mm-hmm. And so I was in Los Angeles, back in Los Angeles. I lived in 12 different locations while working on Ginseng Roots. Mostly they were all in Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Let's see if I could give you the quick rundown. It was like I started in LA, then I went to Minneapolis briefly for like a month, then I went to Portland for a few months, and then I kind of settled in Portland for a while. It was pretty stable until pandemic hit. Then I went to Minneapolis for a summer. Then I went back to LA because I didn't want to do winter in Minneapolis. Then I went back to Minneapolis, and this is the one that disrupted me the most. I was in LA, my life was good, but I didn't know how to finish the book. Hmm. And maybe it's an exaggeration to say my life was good, but stable enough, and it was still pandemic, and it was sunny LA. It was good to be there, but I felt like, no, I think I got to go back home. I got to be close to my family. I got to go close to the ginseng agriculture, and that's where I'll live the ending of this book and solve the ending of this book. And I went back, and it was terrible. Yeah, like I hated being back there, and I wrote those scenes out. And I was like, I can't end the book here. This is despair. This is bad, So it took some time to, for both the narrative of the book and also my own life to arrive in a more positive place.
And you weave time by the close of it. You're also kind of weaving the past into that present. What was the moment where you knew it was over, I guess?
So the series, the last issue, 12, came out in September 2023. I sat down and read the series, and it did not feel complete, and I had like some real despair at that moment of like, oh no, what happened? I've worked on this book for so many years, and it's not a book. So that was a long period of overhaul to figure out how to turn the series of 12 issues into a book that had coherence, the right narrative arc, I don't remember how long that process took, like a year? It took about a year.
Re-editing pages?
I added 60 or 70 pages, and there's some pretty major things. And then I shuffled some things around, too. I don't know if you've compared the series to the...
No, I never read the pamphlet ones. I feel bad. I never supported you back in those days. But I don't go to comic stores or festivals much at this point. So I remember seeing this with how incredibly striking the covers were. But it was one of those, the book's coming out. I'll wait for that.
Yeah. So, Okay. But, I remember doing a signing at TCAF in 2019. That was the very first issue came out. And there were some people waiting in line, like there's a certain type of person that is in line 2 hours before you show up at the table, And so like he was the first one in line that I drew in a copy of Blankets for. And he's like, what are you working on next? And I'm like, well, it's right here. Ginseng Roots is my next project. He's like, oh, you're going to collect it as a book? And I was like, eventually. He's like, I'll wait for the book.
If it sells enough,
Yeah, but you know, he had to wait almost a decade. You know, he had to wait 6 years.
Yeah.
And I would try to talk him into it. I was like, well, it's going to be a long process, and it might not be the same, the issues to the final book. So, and it isn't the same. Yeah. So I ended up adding some pretty substantial things. And the biggest thing I added was my hand health crisis, which was your first question.
Because I worry. I'm a Jewish mother. This is my thing. So, is it the sort of model you would follow again? Would you do another comic series into a book? Okay.
No. I mean, I'm glad to have tried it.
Yeah.
And I talked with Drawn and Quarterly first because I wanted to do the series with them. And that's who I was ostensibly going to do the graphic novel with. And they're like, no, we don't do series anymore. You know, like Optic Nerve had just ended as a series. Clyde Fans had wrapped. Berlin, Jason Lutz had wrapped. They're like, we might do a pamphlet here and there as a one-off, but we're not going to do any more series. We're done with that format.
Yeah.
And so then I asked him, well, could I work with other small publishers, you know? And I talked with 3 publishers, Floating World, you know, in Portland, Image, also in Portland, and then Uncivilized, Tom Kaczynski. But Uncivilized, I mean, had some big things going for it. It had Tom Kaczynski, who I'm a huge fan of as a person and a cartoonist. It also had Gabrielle Bell, who was like her work was really what inspired me to want to make pamphlets. Maybe her and Noah Van Sciver with his Blamos. Those two were like, this is the kind of comics I love right now.
It is weird having that. The publishing mode matters in comics, and it's one of those, you know, for us, it's the, you know, how good is it as a story? You know, does it all hold together? But the economics of publishing and, you know, whether you're doing bookstores, comic stores,
you don't make money off pamphlets.
No. And after the Diamond implosion and bankruptcy, it's, you know, hurting everybody even worse. But when did you, I know the book gets at its own genesis, but, you know, what was the sense of, I can do this?
I can do this.
Yeah, that this was worth the years you knew it was going to take.
That's a great question. Well, I originally started work on Ginseng Roots in April of 2011, which was 1 month after Habibi went to press. And so like it was actually like the celebratory vacation trip after Habibi was to go to China with my then girlfriend. And the initial nugget of doing a book about ginseng was already in my head. So I'm like, you know. So I went on that, you know, kind of dabbled in ginseng while I was there. But, you know, it's just like a nature of like Habibi's release and stuff where I just felt like I wasn't ready to do another research-driven book. And so it just got shelved. You know, I chose to do Space Dumplings, which was something more fun and playful, lighthearted, you know, just kind of ease up a little bit. And then after Space Dumplings got done, I started work on 3 other projects, and I would work for months on them and then lose steam.
Yeah.
And after many months of just spinning wheels is when I sort of like stumbled upon Ginseng Roots in my, you know, my sketchbooks of like, maybe I should do this book. And then it sort of coincided exactly with when I was going back home for a trip. So I just started having conversations then.
And how did you hit on, and I think some of it comes in that final edit that you talk about, that balancing act of history, journalism, and the personal. Mm-hmm. Because the book manages to thread those. And I separate the history and the journalist side. I think those are 2 distinct threads of it. But it all weaves together beautifully. How did you pull that off, I guess?
Thank you. I mean, I don't know.
Or did you figure out what you were doing?
It was more of a gut instinct thing. It was also realizing early on that as much as I was excited about the plant ginseng and all the research and history behind it, the general reader did not have any idea why I would want to make a book about that. Mm-hmm. When I would tell them that it was 10 years of my childhood, that it was my first job working in ginseng cultivation, then they were interested, and I realized, like, okay, this is required for me to do another memoir and to lean into the personal narrative. I think my brother early on said the book should be at least 50% memoir. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I think it did kind of turn out to be about that, or at least a third. Yeah. So it was just sort of an instinctual rhythm. Like, I didn't necessarily want to do memoir.
You seem reluctant at times within the character of the book.
Yeah, I wanted to write about ginseng.
Yeah.
But again, the entry point for the reader was their association, I guess, with, my character of Craig from Blankets, And I think maybe the fact that it is the 20th or was the 20th anniversary of Blankets also made it a little more relevant too, where it's like, oh, this actually might be an okay process for me to do, to be a bit reflective on this thing I created 20 years ago and to expand on those themes as I've aged.
That's what I was going to ask, that we'll say revision of Blankets in a sense. You open up an aspect of Blankets that wasn't there. At one point you reveal your sister, who was not part of the book exactly, but becomes part of Ginseng Roots. And your understanding of your parents changes as you age and as they age. Incredibly vaguely. Can you talk about that a bit, that sense of perspective and change and bringing it in?
Blankets I drew when I was ages 23 to 27. Yeah. So just a young adult,
right.
Barely adult, really mired in, like very much caught up in the emotions of what the book is about. I was only 5 years away from the experiences in that book, really having to come out to my parents about not being in the same faith of them and that struggle. And still feeling very much controlled by my parents at that age, And now I'm the age they were when Blankets came out. Mm-hmm. And so I have a more sympathetic view of them in that sense, but also they're growing quite dependent and vulnerable in old age. So that's a shifting of dynamic. But no, I always felt like, like I worried that maybe Blankets just showed like kind of like authoritarian side of my father that was, borderline abusive. But with old age, especially my dad has really mellowed out. It's like, either the testosterone has like,
the T levels are down.
Gone down. Or it's just like one of the things my sister said is like, no, Dad just didn't like kids. Yeah. So once we weren't any kids anymore and we weren't dependent, then he was able to start, interacting with us better. But I think it's just a natural trajectory of age. It's like
we start to see other people's points of view, or at least who they were, and
maybe you see like the whole narrative in a more multi-generational epigenetics sort of way of like, okay, my parents, I write about this in the book too. I mean, they're the children of their parents who are the children of their parents. So it's like you start to see this long thread and how the trauma, manifested in them and how it manifested in you,
Do you feel you escaped?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm just still part of that epigenetic trauma flow.
When you mention how your parents controlled you, I'm like, there's a sense that they still, not just you,
yes,
they still control us in ways that,
Yeah, they still have more influence than they should in terms of my... even just giving myself permission to be an artist. Yeah. I mean, and that's a common theme for, people in general, cartoonists in general, imposter syndrome, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But, mine is also, I think, coming from a evangelical Christian standpoint and, these very austere, it's like a sin to express yourself.
You should be cartooning for God. Yeah.
I write about that in Blankets.
Yeah. But I was fascinated by that sense of revision, that sense of perspective that comes 20 years down the line and who we become. In the same way, like I say, that the art itself develops and changes, your storytelling modes seem to. Was there a sense where you knew you were ready, I guess, to integrate like this? I know that's sort of hinting at what I was asking before, but that sense of writing something that's bigger than you, but is of you.
Yeah.
If you get me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something like Habibi is more discreet, I would say.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a separate...
I would say that Habibi is my most personal work, actually. It's the most like kind of personally vulnerable book, but most people aren't going to pick up on that because it is this fantastical fairy tale. Yeah.
I had an artist who contended on the show that his sketchbook was the most personal thing he's ever published, and he's published memoirs. And he was like, no, the memoirs are one thing, but if you can actually see my sketchbooks, that's...
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I would say my sketchbooks are also my most raw, unfiltered, version of myself. It's not something that I'm really crafting, it's just kind of vomited on the page. But let's see, with why I came back to autobile, it was just the right time. Again, I feel like it's a sort of instinctual thing. It felt like the right time. Also, the fact that I'm writing about a different culture that's not my own, Chinese culture, You
mentioned being uptight about it in the book, or at least an editor was uptight that it was a cultural appropriation.
And when the series was announced, there was an uproar about it, about like, this isn't allowed, like Craig Thompson's going to write about Chinese culture. This is, and so I did abandon the book for 6 months during all this like internet uproar, and tried to think of other projects and just figure out other careers possibly. At that time I really felt done with comics and drawing in general. But I sort of arrived back at the same place of like, wait, this book unconsciously is a response to that, because it's like, well, what about these places where your own culture overlaps with a culture not your own? I mean, that's a reality most of us live in a globalized society, but especially in the context of my childhood, I grew up in this tiny, tiny town, just 1,200 people, very rural, very homogenous, the kind of place country music songs are made of, gravel roads and pickup trucks and, rednecks and cowboy hats and cows. But it just happened to be that the principal agriculture of this region was ginseng, which is a crop prized and valued and consumed in China, primarily in Asia. So, as a kid, it was just a job. Yeah. I never thought about what ginseng was. It was a job.
We're also pre-internet kids, too. So there's no sense of, you're going to get exposed to some website that shows you, oh, my God, there's people having this stuff everywhere.
Yeah. Well, also, it was just like it was the only culture of our town. Yeah. Like, we grew ginseng, and so I didn't think about it. I didn't think like, oh, that's interesting or weird or anything. And so this was like, it just dawned on me when I started this project. I wanted to do a book about plants. I'm like, what kind of plant do I know anything about? Like, oh, well, the only plant I know anything about is ginseng because I worked in it for 10 years. And then it just dawned on me of like, wow, this is a really fascinating plant that connects opposite sides of the world, and they're completely interwoven. I mean, this country might not exist without ginseng and ginseng selling. And of course, right now with the tariff wars and this
Don't get me started. I'm taking a break right now from writing my response to the Section 232 Department of Commerce probe of pharmaceutical supply chains. I'll get back to that tomorrow when I get back to the office. But yeah, there's a lot going on. It's as part of my day job and as part of the the background for everybody's lives, which we don't take into consideration. In fact, can you talk a little about the research side of it, like what you knew going in, and then how much more the story proliferated once you started to get the geopolitical nature of not just China's market for American ginseng, but when you started to write about the, I'm going to mispronounce it, the Hmong, the Laotian population that ends up doing a lot of the farming, and their history and what these guys went through, and the way the stories keep unfolding, the sort of historical and we'll say geopolitical ties. How much of that were you expecting going into this project, and how much kind of turned it into something much bigger than you thought it was going to be?
Oh, again, I had some of the themes right from the start. I mean, I started with my own memories, then I started with conversations with my family, and as is shown in chapter 2, there's already conflict in how the 5 members of my family remember all these experiences. So I had to go into that. And then I started interviewing the farmers that I worked for as a kid, but all of them are retired by now. So they haven't been in the biz for 20 years. So I'm like, well, now I got to figure out, what does this contemporary ginseng cultivation in Wisconsin look like? So, at first it took me a while to get access to some of those bigger growers. Nobody really wanted to talk to me like, what? You're making it, it didn't make sense to them that I was making a comic book about ginseng, and people were hard to pin down. And then I just started accumulating interviews. Long before I interviewed Chua Vang. I interviewed a woman, Mai Li was her name, who was Hmong and had grown up working in ginseng, and she had great stories to tell. But I didn't quite know how or if it fit in the book, or if that was just its own story that, you know. And there was another giant farmer I interviewed in my hometown, Craig Ballman. And I did, 3 days of interviews with him, which I'm sure you can relate to. And I had all this footage, but I was like, I just don't know how do I make comics pages out of this? Yeah. And then you meet the right person. And Chua Vang was definitely more than anyone. He's the Hmong farmer who his family story is chapter 7 and 8 of the book. It was sort of obvious from our first conversation of like, oh, this guy is a great storyteller. He has a very beautiful story to tell that's about something bigger than ginseng. It's about family. It's about immigration. It's about very complicated paternal dynamics and mortality. And then likewise, when I interviewed Will Su, who's another one of the giant mega growers in my hometown, like there was a family story at the core of his ginseng story that just made it, again, like including my own story in the book, just gave an emotional entry point for the reader. Those were the people I had to find. So, maybe 10% of the people I interviewed made it into the book, because some of them were just kind of dry and informational and very business oriented. I'm like, this is boring even to me. And I do care about the subject. So,
but you found the drama, and you found that, again, we'll say it obviously, because roots are the central mode of the book, and figuring out other people's roots and no matter what culture they're coming from, family dynamics will mess you up, as Philip Larkin puts it, to clean it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way you manage to convey those stories, in no way devaluing your own in one of those, it turns out my experience wasn't that bad because these guys had it. You never go with that sort of one-downmanship or anything.
There's not a value placed on each trauma. It's just, but yeah.
So tell me about the design. Tell me about figuring out how you were going to make this book look like this book.
Well, the series, the 6x9 format of the series was inspired by Kevin Huizinga's Or Else comic. Yeah. Which then also, I know Chester Brown serialized Ed the Happy Clown in that same format, and Noah Van Sciver did a Blammo in that size, and I was just like, oh, to me this is the perfect comic book size, 6x9, and it was Tom Kaczynski at Uncivilized who proposed 2 colors. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, you want to add a second tone? And I hadn't even thought about it. I thought it was just going to be made black and white, and I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be fun to play with. Make it look like Ghost World or something. Mm-hmm. But then I kind of went to town with all different stuff by using a red tone that I could, overlay gradations to make sepia tones. And, I got pretty caught up in that process. But then turning it into a book, the series was about 360 pages. And then I turned this into a 448 page book. So, this series, most issues are 32 pages. It's just like this consistent rhythm. And I tried to make them be self-contained. We talked about how the work is visually more dense than other things I've done. It's also, the storytelling's probably more dense, and that was a result of doing self-contained.
Yeah, giving yourself parameters that had to...
Yeah, I want these to stand on their own. I want people to pick up an issue and it just works as one object. Which maybe isn't the smartest, because maybe you want the cliffhangers to tempt them to buy the other thing. But I also knew part of the frustration with indie comics in the 90s is you would wait forever for that issue and say something like
you did mention
Underwater, something.
I was just about to say, you mentioned Chester Brown, so we have to say Underwater was the one that, was it 9 issues, 10 issues? I forget. But and even with Berlin, once Jason was really going with that, it was coming out regularly, and then life intervenes, and it took a long time before it could be finished and collected.
Yeah. And then I guess I thought Chester Brown because he wasn't worrying too much if an issue would end with any kind of closure at all.
That part
so it's
too.
Suddenly you're mid-scene and it's like, all right, I ran out of pages. That's the end of that issue. And you're like, so I really wanted things to be like, well, if a person just picks up one issue, they'll be content because it will have a beginning, middle, and end. So that was a different way to work, I think, too.
But I think the sense of design, too. The page designs and layouts, like you say, it's denser, but there's a an understanding of graphics that to me feels, like you made a jump of some kind. I don't know if that's anything you felt or if it was just this is how the story needed to be told.
Well, my last real job was graphic designer,
Yeah.
so I come from a graphic design and book design background, although very dated 90s style.
I was going to say, you used to do it in Quark and what was the PageMaker? That was the other.
There was even at Dark Horse they used Aldus freehand.
I was going to say all this, but I forgot that.
No one remembers those programs. So my technical expertise is sort of locked in the 90s. But also, back then is when you did, screen printing. Like, Brett Warnock of Top Shelf used to have a screen print, operation in his basement. And I used to work at a newspaper. It was my first real job when we were still doing paste up and analog stuff.
That's my joke. I started in trade magazines back in 1995, and luckily Quark existed because if I had to do manual paste up, the magazines would have looked like they were made by a serial killer. So at least they'd already gotten digital at that point. So I was able to figure out Quark and then InDesign and move on from there. But because as writers, we were supposed to be laying out our own magazines too, because cheap ownership. But it was very fortuitous for me that digital technology was about 6 months ahead of where I entered the workspace.
Yeah. And that's we're probably in the same time zone. So in a way, this is a love letter to some of those analog printmaking techniques. I'm someone that comes from analog printmaking. Yeah. Maybe we're a dying generation. Like the younger generation, they grow up with webcomics and stuff and formatting things in RGB for posting on Instagram, and so
and JPEGs instead of TIFFs.
Using a second color, and also, obviously, I was inspired by woodblock printing, Chinese woodblock printing, or Japanese woodblock printing, and at first I was going to have a real more straightforward, here's a red, here's a black, and here's a gray, and that's it. But I did
once you figured out
obsessive. I have an OCD side, so the potential is endless here, and getting the sepia tones felt great because it could muddy it up in a good way to give it that organic muddy field quality. And then I could also use the red for the graphic pop. And all, everything in ginseng marketing is red. Yeah. I guess maybe that's true of a lot of Chinese products, but
red gets red. That was our old magazine's motto.
Really?
So,
Time Magazine, and Newsweek, all those had to have red. Yeah. They taught us in school that green doesn't sell and red does.
I believe that.
Really? I don't know if that applies
my
anymore.
magazine, the one I left the field with from 99 until 2014, I was at a trade show. I stopped by their booth recently, and we have not changed the logo since 1999. And the publisher is gone, but the lead salesperson said to me, red gets red, Gil. Gary always said it, and we're just going to stick with that logo until the magazine falls off.
Wow.
So,
all right. I hope it works for this book.
Yeah, it was... It's fine. It's, just that psychology, I guess, of some of this stuff. But yeah, again, it's as a design object, the book itself is just fantastic. I just love, there's the heft of it, just in terms of, it being a hardcover and having, again, 450 pages. But, as you go in, the pages are organic. They really feel alive in interesting ways. And they feel, again, I'll say designed, but not, not constructed. Things really feel like they flow and they're meant to be where they are. And it was a joy to read this thing in this model.
Thanks, Gil.
Which always raises the question of, so what are you working on next?
Really?
Since you pulled this off and you finally accomplished it.
No, it's, if you had asked me this a year ago, I would say nothing. During the course of this project, I did feel like it was my swan song to comics. I'm like, I can't continue in this industry. I'm going to find a new outlet, know? And I spent time trying to find that outlet. Now that the book is done, I do feel like, okay, I will make comics again. But I don't have anything really tangible yet. I've been on the road for something like 8 months now. And so I haven't had any peace or quiet or a moment to rest and doodle in my sketchbooks. I got a little time in December, actually. And so I was dreaming up some ideas then, but then that was the only month that I had to doodle. So U.S. tour is just starting. After 4 months of tour in Europe, I'm starting 2 months of tour in the U.S.
I was going to ask the whole 8 month thing. Is it okay to ask what that involved, or is that just running around for...
Oh, well, I mean, I was a solid 3 months in Europe, but then I used up my 90 days. So, like, you're allowed, you probably know this, but 90 days every 180 days to be in the EU Schengen area. So then I thought I'd stay in Europe because I had plenty of tour events I could have kept doing. But I had to come back to the U.S. and then kind of figure out what the next step was. And I was trying to apply for a visa so I could make it to Angoulême, and that's a huge hassle. And so I ended up being back in the U.S. for 90 days, but it just felt like I was just couch surfing from place to place week by week. So it's just not conducive to really getting anything accomplished, you know.
To just having a place.
Yeah, and I didn't know where I was supposed to be. It wasn't like... I initially just flew back to the Midwest because I wanted to see family, but then I didn't have my computers there. I didn't have my car. You know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to fly to Portland where I have those things. I had left a car and some computers there. And then I hung out with friends in Portland for a hot minute. I went to LA to check in on things there. My old house in Altadena that I had last lived in burned to the ground. So I had to make the little LA pilgrimage. So check out my 3 cities, you know, Minneapolis, Portland, and LA. But then also feeling like, okay, none of these feel like home to me right now. Yeah. I want to visit them, but I don't know where I'm supposed to be, which is a problem through the whole project, but it was even worse by the time I finished it.
Yeah. And now?
Well, now I'm starting U.S. Book Tour. I'll be on the road until the end of June.
Oof.
My first event was yesterday at the LA Times Festival of Books, and my last event is, at least on the calendar right now, is Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the end of June. Then I will be faced the reality of, like, where am I supposed to live? And I don't have a clue right now. I'll take any suggestions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I live in the woods and I live in the house I grew up in. I've been there for 54 years, pretty much. Normal people actually go places and do things. I let everybody else leave, and I make them uncomfortable, and I just stay in my house.
No, a house in the countryside might be the way to do it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, again, it varies for people. It's 25 miles from here, although, as I said, it can be a very rough 25 miles depending on construction and one bad driver. So,
and did you drive it?
Yes, I did. And I ended up driving a lot harder than I thought I was going to today. My GPS it was the Zeno's Paradox GPS, where the time of arrival just keeps getting longer, and then it keeps telling you, no, actually, if you go through Queens and over to Brooklyn, you'll be able to get here a lot easier. It was just a nightmare. But generally, New York is, for me, it's a wonder to come here and then go home to the woods and avoid the deer in the road while I'm driving home, and bear and everything else that come wandering by.
I was just in LA, and I get nostalgic for LA. But my friends there, like, if I were you, it's so expensive to live here. I would just move to Columbus, Ohio, or something.
I was going to ask you, what is the idea? What do you have a conception of what home would feel like, or is that what you're trying to? Yeah,
more so the latter.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like a citizen of the world these days. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't feel American. I guess a lot of us probably don't feel American,
so when I go, I'm either going to TCAF or I'm going to go a month later up to Toronto, and it's one of those. Maybe just look around a little while I'm here. You know, do
you think we could do that again? Like during the war, America's war in Vietnam, where people just defected to Canada?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get away with it in the same way as people did back then.
No. And everything's expensive there, although the dollar goes a lot farther, so we'd be able to own the place. But I think they would also resent us for being the ugly Americans moving in.
Which we are doing everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Last year we went up for July 4th weekend, and I spent time with Anita Kunz and Maurice Velacoop and had a great time. My wife loves Toronto. It's the only festival she would go to if we would do TCAF, because the restaurant scene is fantastic. But we blew off TCAF, went a month later, and now I'm like, boy, July 4th weekend, if we leave the country again, they might start to suspect something. That could be a problem. But yeah, I've been hiding in the woods 54 years. I can keep it going a little longer, I guess. So. But yeah, that sense of home, when you mention the sheer number of places, and your sister mentions or you recount your sister mentioning it in the book, the number of places she's lived.
She says 26 homes.
Yeah, including
in her
buying and selling two houses.
And most of them she had bought, and she just went up to 27 now. She lived in
left the trailer.
She left a trailer because they were raising the the whatever you call
rental fee
the
or
rental
whatever.
fee. Yeah. And she didn't like that. So she bought a condo, and then they just raised the HOA. So she left that. There's something in our family that's very like impulsive bridge burning sort of thing. I'm not proud of that. I know where it comes from. It's definitely from our mom, but I see it in myself. I see it in my sister. And with my sister, it's like, I've never owned anything. I am just a renter, perpetual renter, but she buys places and then moves out of them in half a year.
And I've, again, squatted in this house all my life. It's one of those
You're
strange...
the more sensible one.
Yeah, it's like I said, I get to see the world, and I get to come back to somewhere that's nice and quiet. Even visiting our friend who's hosting this event, he puts on these wonderful parties, and I'd meet all these great people. And on the drives home, I'd lament a little the sense of, if I was in New York, I'd be around the sense of culture all the time. And then I thought, you'd piss them off and they'd piss you off. And it's better that you're just here in small doses. You live in the woods, you come out here sometimes and see people. If anything becomes regular,
Yeah, maybe authors, illustrators, are meant to be, recluses like I think of Bill Watterson, of course,
yeah, that's
but
an extreme
also
example,
like Maurice Sendak. I was friends with Maurice Sendak in the last 3 years of his life, and he had all this property in Connecticut, which was just wooded, wooded cottages. And
I remember the strip that Spiegelman did with him of A Walk in the Woods.
Oh yeah, that's the spot. Yeah. And then Spike Jonze did a great little mini documentary about Maurice. I think that came out after his death.
Oh, I never saw it.
That really captures that locale too. Yeah. But, there is something to be said to like, I guess maybe artists are more productive if they just step away from all the hustle and get it, although maybe Bill Watterson hasn't necessarily been productive.
No, but a happier life is also important.
Yes, a more sane existence.
Yeah, I think I must have told the story on mic before, but Caitlin McGurk years ago told the story of when they were doing the Bill Watterson exhibition at the Billy Ireland, and how she and her boss, Watterson came in and was helping, arrange everything and set up. And the three of them went to like the dining hall nearby. And she realized, oh my God, I'm sitting at a table with Bill Watterson and none of these people know. And yet they probably all loved Calvin and Hobbes at one point in their lives, and they would freak the hell out if they understood. But that's why he did what he did, to not have the constant. I was reading an interview with Bill Murray recently where he said most of his job now is posing like an animal for people. They come up with their phones while he's walking the streets, and he's got to do the fun. And he had stretches where he was a dick about it, and then realized it matters to them. So, it's important to them that I've walked down this sidewalk and they want this. So who am I to be that guy? But I get the Watterson invisibility cloak. That's something. But so yes, you're still looking, and
I don't know. Hope I get some solid leads by the end of this tour. But there's more touring to be done after the U.S. tour anyway. I go back to Europe once again, and I still have to do the UK end of things.
And going to Asia?
So I knew I'd be touring for like a year at least. Yeah. And so I thought of it. Initially, I was like, this will be my sabbatical. But then I realized like touring is not time off. It's not really giving your soul time to breathe. Yeah. It's really just work. Yeah,
William Gibson's description was that, like jet lag, you get there and your soul is still behind. It takes a while to catch up from the instant travel we have.
Spiritual jet lag, yeah.
But going to go to China or Korea? Do you have anything scheduled as far as the book goes?
No. So in the book, you
go there for research.
Yes, in chapters 10 and 11, my brother and I go together to South Korea, to the ginseng capital of maybe the world, in Gunsam, South Korea. And then we go to Jilin province, China, which is really the principal ginseng growing region. Actually, the biggest growing region for Wisconsin ginseng in the world is that part of China.
Bootleg seeds,
But we hook up with an agent there, Wang Ning, who orchestrated some book signings for me while I was out in China. And so I'm having conversations with him about getting a Chinese edition. There are, as you would imagine, already some hiccups. Like it won't pass censors, for instance. Yeah. And I don't know what's happened to my South Korean publisher. Either that or my agent's not doing his job, because I'm like, when are we going to do the Korean edition?
Yeah,
Make this
sense.
happen. Like I love my Korean publisher. So they have sub-agents. I don't speak Korean, so I don't know how to reach out and orchestrate these things. But I mean, I think when I was in Korea is when people were most excited by this project. Mm-hmm. That's where I got a lot of the encouragement that I needed.
Yeah, it seems,
I'm like in South Korea, and they're like, please do this book. We love this idea,
Yeah. Yeah, that's again, like the book is about its own making, and that sense of you coming around to the realization that you needed to make this and that there was an audience out there. You go in the nature of the book that Blankets was a hit, especially in Korea, where there is a lot of rebellion against evangelical parents and all this. Your realization of that holy crap, this thing that I wrote about, what I thought was a unique, experience in the Midwest turns out to have this global applicability. When did you realize you had that sort of audience, or that your work, spoke to people that you never thought it was going to speak to?
I guess right from the start, you probably were there for the launch of Blankets was Mocha 2003.
Yeah.
And I think I signed 500 books that day.
Wow.
I maybe went pee once during the course of the day. But otherwise, I didn't get up for air.
Yeah, there's that in my day job. There's that trade show metabolism where I realize you start the day and around 5 o'clock, it's I never stopped for the bathroom. I should go do that. And then it's oh my god, you look down and it's not pretty because you just haven't been having enough water and you're eating pastries and everything
like syrup.
Is wrong. Yeah.
So that was the moment. I mean, that's not global, but it was but it was just like, wait, I don't understand this because I didn't make this book to be a hit, and I didn't think people in the city would relate to it. I didn't think people who didn't grow up Christian would relate to it. And in fact, they did. Everybody had something universal to connect to it. And then I guess that was reinforced when I went to Europe for the first real time for Carnet de Voyage, and and it was. Blankets was hitting in Italy and Spain and France. I'm like, wait, what's going on here?
You're a phenomenon.
And then it just seems to continue. Like when India is probably the biggest. India might be the biggest market for my books in the world. I mean, that's a pretty big population that loves graphic novels. But both Habibi and Blankets are big there. And, I mean, how different could that be from where I grew up? I grew up in a town of 1,200 people. I didn't even grow up in the town, and I grew up
you're out in the
15-minute drive out in the boonies, gravel roads and stuff. That
So your mom complaining that if we were in the town, at least I could just zip here and zip there.
Yeah, I wish they lived in town. Especially when I was a kid and we were skateboarding. Our dream was to live in town like the kids that had concrete around them. Yeah. We just had a freeway and gravel roads. So our only way we could skateboard is to make a little wooden ramp in the backyard, a half pipe, and I document that in the book too.
Yeah, so maybe the woods of northern New Jersey is not the place for you at this point. Maybe you do need to be a little more.
It could be triggering, but I love nature. I'm a nature boy, so who knows?
Yeah, again, you carry across the sense of land, the sense of what the earth means. Along with the mythologies and everything else that you incorporate, there's the sense of not just belonging, but of what we belong to, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, nature, everything, yeah.
And the narrative medicine thread I also appreciated. I built all sorts of things around my leukemia story that's more in the how can Gil create new forms of anxiety for himself that he hasn't experienced previously and discover that none of them are really having a somatic effect on him, so he'll just keep running those along. That's
But you're being ironic, right? Because they all do have a somatic effect. Our emotions manifest physically in our bodies.
I tend to think so. They just don't have the effect on my white blood cells, which is the direct worrying about whether my disease is going to progress has yet to lead to the disease actually progressing. It causes everything else to go wrong in my life. But, the actual one thing, the time bomb at the center of me, that's on its own clock that I can't see, which again creates an interesting sense of anxiety. It's one of the closing parts of the book that I'll show you later on that I'm working on, where a American Buddhist pal of mine, when I discovered this, or when I learned about this condition of mine and said to him, all this time as a micromanaging control freak, I thought I had, my hands on the steering wheel. It turns out I never did. And he says, when you achieve enlightenment, you'll understand there's no steering wheel. And I was like, yeah, okay, you got me there. You know, I realized Bodhisattva, I should have gone a little bit farther with this, but, you know, it's all these realizations in one's 50s of what we thought was real and what we thought we had any sense of control over. There's more my story than yours, I guess. But
it's the same themes. So
yeah, there's a degree of
midlife
rediscovering. I've been pitched a 25 or 26-year-old TikTok influencer who has a million followers, who's writing about her quarter life crisis.
And
I had that reaction too. And then I thought,
I guess that probably is a thing.
Yeah, I thought, how interesting would it be to sit down with someone and not be, let me tell you, when you're 50-something, but to hear what someone else is feeling at that age and what you expect of life versus where things are going. I have to write back to the PR person and say, if they're actually interested, I might actually want to sit down with them.
Quarter life is when your life just starts beginning, you know.
Which is our take on it. But when you're in the middle of it, as especially in Blankets, you know, the sense that you are that teenager and it's every moment is going to last forever.
Yeah, I guess that was written in quarter life. If I'm 23, 25 years old,
we'll give you 97, 98 years old. You'll get to around 100.
I doubt it.
Fingers crossed with all the radiation.
With some cybernetic parts,
but
bionic parts, whatever.
Yeah. But that sense of what we learn and what maybe these hyper accelerated kids learn nowadays. I'm weirdly fascinated by. But this is way too much of the Gill show. We should really be doing much more of the Craig show. The approach to comics, not just the serial versus graphic novel sense, but how has your understanding of comics and what you do changed? Have you evolved, or has it?
Oh, great question. Well, I mean, early on in my research, I read 2 prose books about ginseng, and one was called Ginseng: The Divine Root. And one was called Ginseng Dreams. And it was frustrating because they were very similar to the outline I had for my book. I had already started conducting interviews, and then I stumble upon these books, and they're like, they've interviewed the same people, and they focused on my hometown. Yeah. They go to Gumsan, South Korea, they go to Hong Kong, and I'm like, oh man, they just wrote the book I thought I was writing. And that was another thing that discouraged me for a while. Yeah. But then, besides the fact that the authors didn't have personal
attachment, they weren't from Marathon.
I grew up for 10 years of my childhood working in ginseng cultivation. That made me unique compared to the authors. But also, just the graphic components of the project like this was like, oh, well, that's a whole different, can of worms. And I just felt like ginseng had so much graphic potential, so much comics potential. Just the Chinese character pictogram for the word ginseng is itself like this cosmological diagram. It's got in the center the character for human or humanity. And then it's got above it's got these 3 triangles or stars that represent the heavens. And then it has these 3 stripes at the bottom, which represent roots going into the earth. So you have earth, heavens, and humanity in between. And then that's it's like a William Blake cosmological diagram of the real, the real story at hand. So, just seeing a character like that and being like, that's a comic in itself. That's a complete story. Yeah. In one pictogram.
And that you can represent it graphically. For ginseng.
Yeah. And I'm like,
it's not going to work in print.
I can build off of that. Yeah. And there's so much potential like that in ginseng. And then there's also this cute little cartoon character. Like this little anthropomorphic ginseng, which was no stretch because in Chinese mythology, there's like hundreds and hundreds of stories of the little ginseng root coming alive. I mean, it's already prized because of its humanoid qualities and the way it's shaped. And then there's all these stories that are similar to, say, the mandrake root, where its roots become arms and legs and it runs from hunters in the woods. And so, I couldn't help but envision my own little cartoon character running around. Also in Asia, there's lots of cartoon mascots of ginseng on all these products. I wanted to create one of my own. So that was like a little, dimension of comics that you can't do in prose, you can't do necessarily in other mediums. But there was a lot of that stuff,
Again, it works as a comic. It I don't want to say exploits, it uses the comic form in a way that's not, you're not doing info dump at any point with, oh, this could be a page or two of prose in the middle. Everything is incorporated into the imagery and design that you have in it. It just works phenomenally. So
thank you.
I'm really impressed. You mentioned Blake just now. Besides the cartoonists you'd mentioned earlier, what were your artistic influences as far as, not just for the book, but I mean, as you were coming up, did you have artists and art history, any sort of visual?
Well, he's not Chinese, but Hokusai, who's known for the the wave, he did I think it's 18 volumes of manga. That's where the term manga comes from. It was this visual encyclopedia that Hokusai created at the turn of the century, like late 1800s, early 1900s, as instructional visual dictionaries for artists. And those are all like his beautiful brush drawings translated into wood block. And they have like a black ink, a gray ink, and a red ink. That visually was a huge inspiration. A lot of like Chinese watercolor painters who also just use that red as the second tone. It'd be gray washes and then a little red for sepia.
And when you were coming up as high school into becoming an artist yourself, were there artists who you sort of emulated? Not again.
Well,
was it
I would
primarily
say when
comics?
I was in high school, the biggest comics influence was Bill Watterson again. It was Calvin and Hobbes, because my first love is the comic strip. Yeah. And it started always with Charlie Brown, Peanuts, Snoopy. When I was little, my first love. And then as I got a little older, it was Bloom County. And then when Calvin and Hobbes showed on the scene, it was Calvin and Hobbes. And so that was my most consistent attachment to comics. Because by the time I was in high school, I wasn't looking at comic books. Right. Which I think was a healthy phase to go through, of just stepping away from comics for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the way I draw with a brush, and I like to draw trees and forests and stuff like that, I think that comes from Bill Watterson.
And when I started drawing, which is in my 50s, at 50, it was all trees. Yes. And it was one of those things where I think I was with Lanier's. I was recording with him, and he went on particularly about Watterson. He's like, I know everybody likes a snowman, but it's the trees. That's where Watterson really nails it. And I was like, you're right. These things just we took them in by osmosis when we were young, but when you start realizing the grace that goes into to those drawings,
I think all of Blankets might be inspired by the final Calvin and Hobbes strip. Mm-hmm. Like that one strip, in some ways, inspired a whole book. So and I've always been a brush guy, still, and so like looking at obviously Chinese calligraphy, but also Chinese painting, which focuses a lot more on brush and calligraphy than, say, Western approaches towards painting.
Easier with your hands, easier or tougher than a nib working with a brush?
Oh, to me, it's way easier.
I thought so, but I had no idea how real artists work.
Yeah, I've never figured it out.
I've
tried nibs so many times, I can't figure it out. Because like the way I move my hand, I guess it just always just like trips up on the paper and makes a mess, and I don't like the scratch, the resistance. Some people love the resistance. That's the pleasure. Yeah. The AMSR, or what is it? Yeah.
ASMR.
ASMR. Yeah. Pleasure of it. But for me, it's like, no, I want
the flow.
Yeah. Flick of the wrist, I mean, ideally, I'd like to work more calligraphically, because I know that the density of the way I draw and comics pages might not necessarily lend themselves to brush. Yeah. It's like I'm fighting. They're like in conflict.
Kate LaCour sent me a brush pen when I had taken up drawing initially, and she's like, I think you'll like working with this. The moment I drew up a heron that I'd taken a picture of, I'm like, yep, she knows me. Okay, yeah. She knows that.
If you're drawing a tree or a heron, you definitely need a brush or brush pen. Yeah.
It turned out that, you guys who devote your actual lives to these things, as opposed to a goofy hobbyist like me, actually know what you're doing and how the tools are really there for you. The big question, which I always ask people, what are you reading? What do you bring with you on the tour?
Yeah, I mean, that fluctuates a lot, and I feel like I actually read less on tour. But I have been dipping in and out of a number of different books. I was reading Jonathan Letham's new book, Cellophane Bricks. Do you know about that?
Nope.
He writes it's a book of like they're like poetic short story essays that springboard off of different visual arts, everything from his father's paintings, one of his best friend's sculptures. He writes about the comics of Chester Brown, his brother's graffiti art, Nan Golden's photography, Raymond Pettibone. It's a really cool book.
Wow.
And it's a hard book to describe because it's not like he's writing essays specifically about those things.
But
he's letting the energy of them fuel a whole new story for himself.
The cellophane bricks?
Yep. So I've been enjoying that. I've been rereading Patti Smith's M Train because it's the history of the 50th anniversary of Horses, her album. And I love her writing, and I don't know, something about... she's written to me the best books about artists' relationships and how they shift over time and mortality. And that would be Just Kids, about her relationship with Mapplethorpe, and then M Train about her relationship with Fred Sonic Smith, her late husband from MC5. So that I'm rereading. I'm reading Elaine Pagels, which I just was at the LA Times Festival of Books and realized she was there. I'm like, what? I could have met one of my theologian that's my crush. Karen Armstrong and Elaine Pagels are two like Christian theologians that I get really obsessed with. I think Chester Brown does too. And I'm rereading her book Adam and Eve and the Serpent, which is about sexuality and gender in the Bible.
Yeah, she did the Gnostic Gospels, right?
All those books are kind of nonfiction, so I do like reading nonfiction. Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah, Gnostic Gospels is Karen Armstrong. Wait, I mixed up the two.
I think that was Elaine.
No, that's Elaine Pagels.
But that was like 90s or so.
So for Elaine Pagels, I'm also rereading this book, Adam and Eve and the Serpent. But another favorite of hers is History of Satan, which is an incredible book about where this character of Satan or Lucifer emerged in a revisionist version of Judaic text. He's not there originally.
Yeah,
in fact, a lot of his character is attributed to God in the earliest.
My father has long questioned the Book of Job and whether it's actually part of the
canon.
Yeah, and I was going to say part of the Torah, but whether it actually is or just either is something that was added later or something that, and I think that might be her perspective, predates a lot of this stuff and gets kind of adapted into, okay, let's put it into this tradition, but this is the weird story we had of Job and this advocate or adversary before.
Well, you could say that about a lot of Old Testament books, but
I have to say that I have a section in the Iliad that I'm convinced is the great meta aspect of it all. My brother's like, oh no, that was a redaction. That was something that came later. I'm like, yeah, but it really fits dramatically in terms of, the points I like to make about this poem. But that's we have whatever was handed down to us is what we have. That's figuring out how it fits together, I guess. Do you find yourself some of the books we're talking about are ones related to your Christian, hard evangelical Christian roots. Is that an aspect of yourself you feel you've achieved peace with?
Wow.
I know it's question. A gigantic bomb to drop as far as
there are moments of peace with it, but no, it's a constant.
Do you feel you're wrestling with who that child was?
I'm constantly wrestling with that, yeah. And some of my friends tease that I'm a Christian and stuff because of, I have this ongoing fixation on the Bible and Jesus's teachings and, framing things through that lens. I do not believe literally that, I guess to be a tenet of Christianity, you have to believe that Jesus is the literal Son of God. And I think it's kind of the opposite, that Jesus's message was, we are all children of God. I don't think Jesus ever claimed his divinity. They say there's only one of the Gospels where that term is even used, Son of God. The rest are Son of Man. Yeah. It's very abstract. Jesus dies and supposedly is resurrected, but Mary Magdalene runs into the gardener, and it's only after she leaves that she's like, wait, that was Jesus. And then his disciples walk with this guy for 3 or 4, I don't know if it's weeks or days between cities. Yeah. And after they part ways with him, it dawns on them. They're like, oh, that was Jesus. So it's it seems pretty clear to me. The message is like, oh, this was not a literal person. This is an energy. This is a realization of the divinity within us, So that I believe in.
Yeah. Sense of religion? Or have you explored other religions that you file
spiritual?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. It feels more
really. I'm not
looking at a specific religion as opposed to a sense of.
I'm not that interested in what I can just physically see.
Yeah.
Or know. I'm much more obsessed with the mysterious and the things that I don't know how to communicate or understand. So I think that's what motivates my books too, Yeah. So yeah, I would say I'm a generally spiritual person, spiritually curious person.
I feel it's going to inform your next book, and there will be a next book. I insist.
Okay.
So we'll get together to I hope, sit down and record again. But in the meantime, like I said, the object of Ginseng Roots is one of those things that's going to be on my shelf and draw attention to itself just because of the design, the heft, and the experience of reading it. So, Craig,
thank you, Gil.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh man, my pleasure. This has been great. Just like hanging out like old times.
And that was Craig Thompson. Go get Ginseng Roots, a memoir out now from Pantheon. It's a magnificent book, and you will thank me if you don't know anything about Craig or his work. You will thank me if you pick this thing up and dive in. And go get Craig's earlier books like Blankets and Habibi. He really is an amazing talent, and as our conversation should get across, starting with that question about his hands, you never know how much an artist can give us, so treasure what there is, You should also check out Craig's site, which is craigthompsonbooks.com, all one word, for more about his work. There's a blog there, but that hasn't been updated since 2019. He's also on Instagram as Craig Thompson Books, all one word, just like the site, and that's CraigThompsonBooks. Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to. The Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.